I think President Biden's goals for the meeting were somewhat different than President Xi's. President Biden wanted to come into this meeting and convey to President Xi how he sees the U.S. China relationship and what approach his administration will take in dealing with China. President Biden has been very clear he sees the U.S. China relationship as highly competitive. He's even used the phrase extreme competition in talking about China. So he used the meeting with President Xi to be clear that the U.S. plans to compete with China, plans to do what it takes to put the U.S. in as strong a position to deal with China by shoring up domestic competitiveness at home, by engaging with allies and partners around the world. In fact, earlier in the day, prior to the video meeting with President Xi, President Biden signed the infrastructure bill, just a significant victory for him coming into the meeting. But at the same time, President Biden also wanted to make the point that despite the growing list of differences between the U.S. and China, despite the intense competition, there is still a need for diplomacy and for effective bilateral communications in order to ensure that the competition between the U.S. and China does not veer into conflict. President Biden also wanted to use the meeting to explore the idea of establishing guardrails in the relationship to ensure, again, that it doesn't bleed over, the competition doesn't bleed over into conflict. And finally, he also wanted to make the point to President Xi that unlike his predecessor, when it comes to China, the Trump administration does not plan to abandon the idea of cooperation with China. And I think he summed all of that up nicely in his opening remarks when he said that the two sides need to establish some common sense guardrails to make sure when we compete it doesn't result in conflict, that the two sides need to be clear and honest where we disagree, but we also need to work together where our interests converge and intersect. President Xi came into the meeting with President Biden having just completed the 6th plenum in Beijing the week prior, which saw the passing of the Communist Party's 3rd ever historical resolution, which confirmed President Xi his status on par with Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping, China's previous leaders. And that puts him in a much stronger position, political position, to secure an unprecedented 3rd term at the 20th Party Congress in the fall of 2022. But there's a lot of time between now and the fall of 2022, and a lot can happen. President Xi will be laser focused during that time on domestic politics so that he is able to do over the course of the next year what is necessary domestically for him to secure a 3rd term. China still faces a number of challenges at home, the real estate sector, energy shortages, a slowing economy. And as a result, President Xi wanted to use the meeting to lower the risk of international disruptions, especially those in the U.S. China relationship, so that he can focus on his domestic agenda. And as such, he was aimed at doing what he could do to put the U.S. China relationship on more stable footing and reduce the risk of complicating those domestic political goals. And we heard some of this in President Xi's opening remarks, where he indicated his emphasis was going to be on ensuring a sound and stable U.S. China relationship and moving the relationship forward in a positive direction. First of all, I think the fact that the meeting took place at all is in itself a very important positive outcome. It avoided all the negative optics that we saw around U.S.-China meetings earlier in the year in Alaska and in Tianjin. It was an important meeting. We are at a really low point in U.S.-China relations. The antagonism between the two countries has been growing on a range of issues: political, economic, technology, military, security. U.S. and China have the 2 largest economies, the 2 largest militaries, and are the 2 largest greenhouse gas emitters. The U.S.-China relationship is an important relationship, perhaps the most consequential in the world. And so the fact that the 2 leaders had a 3.5-hour virtual meeting is a good thing. Beyond that, the meeting itself was a good opportunity for the 2 leaders to make clear their intentions, priorities, and concerns in the U.S.-China relationship, and to begin to set the terms of a new chapter in bilateral relations, one which is characterized by rising competition and greater risk across a range of issues. Both leaders emphasized the importance of maintaining good communication going forward, and it will be important for the 2 sides to follow up the presidential meeting to try to bring a more constructive approach at all levels in the bilateral relationship. U.S. officials have been having difficulty engaging their Chinese counterparts in a productive fashion that allows the two sides to begin to solve problems. There's been quite a bit of resistance throughout the Chinese bureaucracy, but now that the Chinese leader has given, in a sense, given his top cover to Chinese officials at all levels throughout the bureaucracy, this should help to empower officials to begin the hard work of addressing and solving problems. And as part of that, there could be the establishment of new working level groups to discuss a range of issues in the relationship, whether it's trade and economics, cybersecurity, or crisis management. Well, going into the meeting, expectations were not high for a major breakthrough or a reset in U.S. China relations. Senior U.S. officials said they were not seeking concrete outcomes or specific deliverables, but nevertheless, my own view is that the two sides were able to make some progress on a number of issues. First, on Taiwan. I think the meeting gave the two leaders an opportunity to discuss what is arguably the most dangerous flashpoint in the relationship. As I understand it, Taiwan was a major topic of discussion during the meeting, and this gave each of the leaders an opportunity to better understand each other's position and how each other views the current dynamics. By all accounts, the two leaders offered important reassurances to each other that neither intends to move away from the original political understandings that have guided the two countries on the Taiwan issue, or make fundamental shifts away from the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. And this alone, I think, could contribute to reducing the chances for miscalculation, which would have grave consequences for the relationship. There was also a discussion on the need for more robust crisis communication mechanisms to ensure that an unintended military incident or a collision in the Asia-Pacific or around Taiwan does not escalate into a full-blown conflict. The two sides have discussed the issue of crisis management in the past, but have not moved forward with sufficient urgency. The two leaders' discussions should give these efforts much more priority to break through any bureaucratic resistance. The two leaders also discussed the importance of developing greater cooperation on major transnational or global issues where the two countries have common interests: health security, climate change, non-proliferation, macroeconomic stability, just to name a few. And then finally, we heard the news the day after the meeting that the two sides have come to some agreement on journalist visas. As a result of negotiations between diplomats in our embassies in Beijing and Washington, D.C., and this has been a key irritant in the bilateral relationship. My own view is the two sides should continue with this kind of problem-solving approach. I'm a big believer that solving problems between the U.S. and China will have the greatest impact on the relationship given its current state. The virtual summit was not the end, but rather the beginning of what will be a difficult process of establishing the terms for a U.S.-China relationship that is moving into a new chapter, one that will be increasingly defined by competition and greater risk across a range of domains to include political, economic, technological, military and security, and even ideological. The virtual meeting between the two presidents showed that the two sides can make important efforts to reduce near-term risks and to put the relationship on better footing. But we also have to keep in mind that the two leaders have really yet begun the process of addressing the strategic and structural problems that will determine the long-term trajectory of the U.S.-China relationship. The meeting, if the two leaders are able to stay engaged in the relationship, if they can keep their own lines of communication open, if they can empower officials throughout their own bureaucracies to be more pragmatic in engaging counterparts in trying to solve or alleviate problems in the relationship, then we might be able to look back at this meeting down the line at some point and discover it was more important than we knew at the time.